did the College Football Playoff Selection Committee get it right? MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, with one final argument on the fourth spot in the 2020 College Football Playoff. Please like the video, even if you don't agree with me. If you enjoy the content, smash the like button. Of course, share the videos on social media. I mention this from time to time to let you know that not everyone knows that we're here talking college football every day. Just don't hog the content for yourself and these tremendous conversations we have on a daily basis. Let people know that we're here talking college football every day, 24/7, 365. Of course, subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications. That way you know when we're going live. All right, let's break it down. There was debate over the third spot given to Ohio State because of the number of games Ohio State played, 6 versus the other 3 teams, 11. But more debate concerning the fourth spot between Texas A&M, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, and Cincinnati. Cincinnati undefeated in the group of 5, the best group of 5 team. We're going to eliminate the Bearcats based on the group of 5 schedule. It's more valid, and it's more of a better comparison to look at Notre Dame, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma from a scheduling standpoint. They all have their pros and cons. Notre Dame has the most wins at 10-1. Texas A&M probably plays in the best conference, and when I say probably, it means I believe that the SEC is the best conference, but it can't be proven to date because there are no non-conference games until the playoff and the bowl games. It can't be proven. Just assume that the SEC is the best conference. Oklahoma has an 8-game winning streak, but on the cons, the 2 losses, but also a conference championship. So I was asked following the conference championship games in the call-in show Saturday night, who do you select, Mark? Well, I said there is no clear-cut number 4 team because Oklahoma's the hottest team playing the best football. They've got a conference championship, but on the downside, they've lost 2 games. Notre Dame's claim is that they've got the best win in the country. They've got the most wins at 10, and they made it to a conference championship game, but they got annihilated in said game 34-10. Texas A&M's claim is that they play in the best conference in the country. They're 8-1, and they lost to the best team in the country, albeit by 4 touchdowns. But they don't have a conference championship or a title game appearance. So let's compare the schedules. That's the best way to do it. Compare the wins. And so I told everyone I would go from best win for each team to second best, third best, fourth best, on down the line, and compare the wins in 2 ways. Number 1, the quality of the opponent. Number 2, the dominance of performance or lack thereof. So let's rank the Notre Dame wins and take a look at them. They've got the best win in the country. They beat Clemson 47-40 in overtime at home. Although Clemson was without the best quarterback in the country, Trevor Lawrence, and 3 defensive starters, Captain James Skalski, outside linebacker Mike Jones, and Tyler Davis, their best D lineman. So I would estimate Clemson to be more like the 5th, 6th, or 7th best team in the country. Still an excellent win for Notre Dame. They also beat North Carolina, a top 15 team, a game that they dominated defensively after the first quarter, holding North Carolina, one of the top 5 offenses in the country, to 3 points. Quality win there. I also want to make a statement here about quality wins. Follow me here. Most people like to categorize quality wins as either the win is a quality win or not a quality win. That makes no sense. There are varying levels of the quality of each win by every team in the country. Is Clemson a quality win? Is North Carolina a quality win? Is Pitt a quality and Boston College a quality win? Yes and no to varying degrees. Clemson's one of the 3 best teams in the country. North Carolina's more like one of the top 15 teams in the country. So you can't say both of those are equally quality wins. They are both quality wins. No, Clemson would be a more quality win. It should be weighted higher. North Carolina's less of a quality win than the Clemson win, but it's more of a quality win than beating Pitt and Boston College. Should we completely discard any non-ranked win? Of course not. There's nothing magical about being the 25th best team in the country, or who we think is the 25th best team in the country versus the 26th best team in the country. That's ridiculous. There are varying degrees of the quality of each win. It shouldn't be a 10 and a 0, and that's all there is. There are 7s and 8s and 4s. So, Clemson's a top 3 win. Under the circumstances of the personnel losses, probably more like a top 6 to 8 win. The North Carolina win, a top 15 win. Pitt and Boston College both finished at 6 and 5 at the ACC. Notre Dame dominated Pitt, crushed them 45-3. They won comfortably against BC 45-31. Game not as close as the score would indicate by 2 touchdowns. Decent wins against top 40 to 45 opponents. Then next, Notre Dame has 4 wins against teams that you could categorize pretty much all in the same bucket. They're all like the 60 to 70th best teams in the country. Louisville, Georgia Tech, Florida State, and Duke. The Louisville game was a struggle, 12-7. They cruised through Georgia Tech, kind of a ho-hum, non-effort win, 31-13. The Florida State game, they were down in the second quarter to an awful Seminole team, 145-26. They struggled against Duke in game 1, only led by 1 score in the fourth quarter, won it by 14. Syracuse is one of the worst teams in Power 5 football. They won by 24. South Florida is one of the worst teams, period, anywhere. 1-8 in the group of 5. Notre Dame won 52-0. This is a less than daunting schedule. Notre Dame opponents went 44-63. Well, of course, Notre Dame went 10-1 against them, so you could almost say, in a sense, that their opponents went 43-53. And that's actually the Power 5 record against on Notre Dame's schedule. The Power 5 teams, so you take out South Florida, went 43-53. And, of course, Notre Dame's got the loss against Clemson, 34-10. That game was 31-3 in the third quarter. Clemson could have scored 50. They were crushing Notre Dame. This is how the game basically went. Notre Dame won the first quarter. They outplayed Clemson. Only led 3-0. It should have been 10-0, but they led 3-0. And then Clemson completely crushed them for 2 quarters. Got into the third quarter at 31-3, and Clemson pretty much just went, game over. We're just going to get some exercise the rest of the game. Clemson could have annihilated Notre Dame. So that is a crushing loss. That is a bad, bad loss. Let's look at Texas A&M. Their best win by far is against Florida at home, 41-38. Needed a late fumble and a field goal to beat the Gators. I consider Florida to be one of the 10 best teams in the country. I don't care that they lost 3 games. They're one of the 10 best teams in the country easily. Auburn would be Texas A&M's next win. The Tigers went 6-4 with 2 super controversial wins against Ole Miss and especially Arkansas. That Auburn team could have easily been 4-6, but that's the second best Texas A&M win. Then you can group LSU, Arkansas, Mississippi State, Tennessee pretty much in the same category. LSU, the most capable team, as we saw against Florida. Mississippi State played okay in spurts. Arkansas got off to a great start this season, faded down the stretch. Tennessee got off to a great start and then fell off the rails. But those are 4 marginal wins for Texas A&M against all 500 LSU 5-5 teams or less. The other teams went 3-7. The win against South Carolina was the most dominant at 48-3, but of course the Gamecocks went 2-8. And then Vanderbilt, a completely other level of awful at winless in the country. And Texas A&M only beat Vanderbilt 17-12 at Kyle Field. This schedule of teams that Texas A&M defeated for all of Jimbo Fisher's just ridiculous, just dissertations about how great his team is and what a tough schedule they played. These teams went 30-50. So this was not a daunting schedule for Texas A&M. 30-50, the wins. And, of course, they lost to Alabama by 28 points, a game that was 14-all second quarter, and then the Tide rolled. You could equate the Notre Dame loss to Clemson and the Texas A&M loss to Alabama pretty much being very similar. Now let's look at Oklahoma. Interesting team. They lost their first 2 games of the season, ripped off 8 consecutive wins, finished 8-2, Big 12 champions again. Okay. Their most impressive win from a quality of opponent standpoint was Iowa State, 27-21. They beat Oklahoma State when the Cowboys looked like the best team in the Big 12 at the time by 4 touchdowns. They beat Texas by a touchdown, 53-45. You would generally have to put those 3 games in the same class. Those are all top roughly 15 to 20 teams in the country. TCU, a step down, but still TCU had a fine season at 6-4. They're a top 40 team. And the Sooners won at 33-14. Texas Tech, awful. Oklahoma beat them by 34. Baylor, awful. Oklahoma beat them by 2 scores. And then Kansas and Missouri State at a whole other level of awful. Oklahoma's Power 5 opponents at 33-35. 33-38 overall, with the Missouri State 0-3 record included. Oklahoma lost to Kansas State, who started well, finished poorly, 38-35, and of course Iowa State 37-30. They avenged it in the Big 12 championship game. It's interesting that Notre Dame is playing Alabama in the playoff, and Alabama played Texas A&M, of course, and we could compare those scores once Notre Dame plays Alabama. It's interesting also that Texas A&M is playing North Carolina, a team that Notre Dame beat by 2 touchdowns. And then Oklahoma is playing Florida, a team that Texas A&M beat on a late game field goal. All right, let's look at the dominance of play in regards to yards and points. Notre Dame outscored its opponents at 35 to 18.6. So Notre Dame finished 22nd in the nation in scoring, 14th in scoring defense. And again, 35.1 to 18.6. For Texas A&M, they had the 40th rated offense in points per game at 31.9 and 26th in scoring defense at 21-1. So they beat their opponents by 10 points per game. Oklahoma, the most dominant if you just look at scoring without putting it in context. So we'll give you the numbers, then we'll put it in context. Oklahoma, 9th in the nation in scoring at 41.8 points per game, 30th in scoring defense at 21.9. But you got to consider those 2 wins against Kansas, 62-9 by 53 points, and over Missouri State, 48-0 by 48 points. Really boosting the scoring averages both offensively and defensively for Oklahoma. Put it into context, in a 10-game season, those 2 games are 20% of the season, and Oklahoma annihilated those teams by 53 and 48 points. 2 awful, awful football teams. So statistically, Oklahoma, in terms of scoring and scoring defense, the best. They won games by an average of 20 points per game. But again, we just don't look at the numbers here. We put it into context. So this is a very similar storyline for all 3 teams. Yards per game. You can go across the board and see that every team, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma, all outgained their opponents by about 120 to 30 yards per game. Notre Dame, number 22 in total offense, number 21 in total defense. So their yardage differential per game at 455 to 335 is 120 per game. Texas A&M, 31st in yards, 14th in defensive yards given up, and outgaining their opponents by 120 yards per game, 437 to 317. Oklahoma just slightly better at 476 per game in yardage, 18th in the country, and 20th in total defense at 334. Again, we take into context the Clemson win by Notre Dame and also the Clemson loss by Notre Dame, and that magnifies Notre Dame's weaknesses. That they beat a compromised Clemson team is still an excellent win, but compromised Clemson team, and in the rematch, they lost by 24. It looked more like 45. Also, the Duke and Louisville efforts were poor. The Florida State effort, poor to a certain extent. Notre Dame beat 2 ranked teams, and understand what I said earlier about quality wins, but we will note 2 ranked teams, Clemson and North Carolina. They beat 4 winning teams in Clemson, North Carolina, Pitt, and BC. For Texas A&M, take into consideration they needed some help to beat Florida, but still an excellent win against the Gators at home. The second best win of Auburn, again, compromised by Auburn's two sketchy wins against Ole Miss and Arkansas. The South Carolina game was Texas A&M's most dominant by far, and they struggled mightily against LSU and Vandy. Texas A&M beat one ranked opponent. They beat two winning teams, Florida and Auburn. For Oklahoma, two losses out of the gate when Spencer Rattler was making mistakes and when the running game was not what it would be down the stretch. So Oklahoma got the running game in order. That helped out Spencer Rattler. He made less mistakes, and that really was the offensive transformation for the Sooners, who beat three ranked teams, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, and Texas, and we're talking about ranked currently, not ranked at the time of the game. And they beat four winning teams, the three we mentioned, plus TCU. Our rundown of Notre Dame, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma. Again, the eye test most recently would go to Oklahoma in my estimation. Texas A&M second, Notre Dame third if you just look at the final game played. Notre Dame's got the best resume top to bottom with a slight advantage over the other two teams. Of course, Oklahoma's got the conference championship, but they got the two losses. Notre Dame has the best record at 10-1. I gave my fourth spot to Notre Dame, but I think it's a mess, and I don't think they're clearly better than the other two teams by any stretch of the imagination. And I would feel most comfortable in playing Oklahoma being the best team to face Alabama in giving them any kind of a game, then Texas A&M, then Notre Dame at this point, based on what we saw out of the Irish last week. Your thoughts down in the comments section below right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Hit that bell for the notifications. That way you know when we're going live each and every day.